Everybody, and welcome to the graveyard shift. This is clearly the A team who've managed to get here on time, so I'm very grateful. I'm looking at Deb Erb over there at OPIC. I did my first property deal, housing deal 20 years ago in Zambia, and for about 10 years I was active in the space, did a lot of business here in East Africa, and running Standard Bank's real estate group, and then I've been out of it for 10 years. So coming back after a hiatus of more than 10 years is quite interesting. I'd say on the positive side, there are a lot more young people involved. There are a lot of women involved that wasn't before. And we've seen some amazing projects around Nairobi the last few days that have been incredibly encouraging. I guess the negative side is that we have the same problems, very limited penetration of mortgages. You know, we haven't caught up with the backlog. We still haven't dealt with the currency mismatch between funders, the local currency, hard currency, you know, and I guess you've got to be persistent, you know, the old adage, you know, if at first you don't succeed, skydiving probably isn't for you. And as somebody that has a high risk appetite, not only did I do something difficult, but did it in Zimbabwe. And I reckon if we can do it in Zim, we can do it anywhere. So, my title is Providing Infrastructure and Financial Inclusion Through Formalising Urban Settlements. And let me take you through it. I speak quite quickly, so I'll try not to speak too quickly, but it'll speed things up. So, basically, we have the same problem in Zimbabwe that pretty much every other country in sub-Saharan Africa has. There are at least 1.2 million households that don't have formal title. I would point out that notwithstanding the lack of formal title in Zimbabwe, a lot of those residences are actually quite decent dwellings. They're often solid brick buildings. They're not just shacks, but the title issue is a problem, and the majority of those are unserviced. So just to give context to that, 1.2 million households at 5 or 6 residents per household is 6 or 7 million people. That's half the Zimbabwean population. It's a highly urbanized country, but an informal urbanized country. And we've talked about this a lot. There's lack of formal title prevents access to finance, and infrastructure gaps are significant. So even though people might have decent houses and they might have electricity, they generally have very poor road, water, sewage reticulation. And we've talked about this. Public finance can't solve the gap. So what's the solution? Our solution is taking a formal title approach and registering mortgage bonds over those properties. Will be able to mobilize capital. So Kwangu and Ngakwami basically means mine, as in it belongs to me, both in Shona and isiNdebele, the 2 languages in Zimbabwe. And that's been set up as a presidential title deed trust. So we've been dealing with government for the last 4 years, and we've had to deal with 5 different ministries. So that is as painful as it sounds. It's like going to the dentist. But we've got to the point where finally the president demarcated, set up, or the government of Zimbabwe set up a trust. We were very specific about establishing a trust that's independent of government, but the government has donated urban land across the country to this trust. And we've set up independent trustees who are well-respected individuals in the community. One of them, in fact, the chairman of the trust is Much Masunda, who was the mayor of Harare. I guess it's atoning for his sins and lacking in the 5 years that he was mayor, not putting the infrastructure in. He's now making up for it. And we've got 4 or 5 other very respected private sector individuals. We're in the process now of appointing 3 permanent secretaries from justice, housing, and local government, because we believe that that interaction will be quite helpful in terms of tying together the government pieces. But it's still very much a private sector, not a public sector institution. What we will do is register mortgage bonds over each of the title deeds. So government has granted title deeds. Our institution, Kwangu, I'll get into the structure, will register mortgage bonds, and that creates the collateral that's necessary to raise infrastructure. Again, if you go back to that 1.2 million properties, assuming that you do just $30,000 assuming a value of $30,000 per property, which I think, Max, you would say is probably a pretty conservative average across the country, even in informal settlements, there's a value. That's $35 to $40 billion, which is the GDP of Zimbabwe. So this is collateral that becomes unlocked at fairly nominal cost to the individuals. So individuals are going to have to buy their title deeds. It's about $320 to $350. Which is not nothing, but it's not a significant amount of money relative to the value of the properties we're talking about. And then stamp duty and bond registration incentives from government will help from their side. What do we do as the arrangers of the financing? We're going to provide infrastructure primarily for areas that require it, roads, water, and sewage reticulation. And interesting seeing things through the sort of green energy lens or the green property lens. A lot of the kind of ideas we're having now are to be able to finance off the back of the collateral things like solar installations and other add-on benefits. Because again, you're dealing with 1.2 million households that have never had access to credit. There is essentially no credit in the Zimbabwean market except to corporates and high wealth, high net worth individuals. There are 8,000 mortgages in the whole country. Having heard there are only 35 in Kenya, 1,000 in Kenya, that's maybe not so bad. It's the problem in our whole continent. The second thing we want to do is create financial inclusion. I've touched on this already, but by creating collateral, bankable collateral, we want to raise funding and start providing credit to people. Small loans, $2,000, $3,000, 10, 15% LTV, not complicated credit, not going through a bank process. That can change the face of these communities. I was told to keep my structure very simple. The first deal that Deb and I did had 25 legal contracts across 6 jurisdictions and took an entire day to sign. So we're going to keep it a lot simpler this time. But if you just follow that structure, at the top is the trust, as I mentioned. Underneath that is the operating entity. So Kwangu Bond Management Company, which is essentially the operating business, has an independent board. In each of the different suburbs, so I've used Kadri Park and Southleigh, suburbs of Harare, also one in Bulawayo, one in Harare, we set up a ring-fenced SPV, which we're calling a bond holding company in accordance with the legal framework in Zimbabwe. Under each of those, we'll be having title deeds with first-ranking mortgage bonds registered in the name of the bond holding company, and then that participation, that security will then be ceded to the lenders. In the first instance, infrastructure providers or potentially lenders for inclusion, and then later mortgage-backed securities. Again, I took your advice, don't go into securitization. I'm really glad that a few other people have. I'm an investment banker, so I love those slides. I mean, securitization is one of the options, but it's not the only one. But the fundamental principle is we create security, we manage it, and we assign it to whoever's taking the risk. Very important step, accountability in fund disbursement. This is big sums of money we're talking about, and you can imagine when you're putting in infrastructure, the risk of corruption is high. So we are putting in all the structures that you would expect in a normal project financing infrastructure type transaction. The management company issues drawdown requests. There's infrastructure providers have been vetted through a formal RFQ, RFP process. There are technical agents that have been appointed, so we're going to use the Industrial Development Bank of Zimbabwe. They've got the infrastructure capacity to monitor drawdowns, and they have to sign off on work being complete, so no $10,000 toilets and pipes and things being signed off. Obviously, this is the most dangerous part of this. As being the person responsible for the financial architecture, corruption happens there. Like you, Jamoke, I like to get my hands dirty. It's where the rubber hits the ground. This is what matters. And then, as I've touched on already, the security structure. We'll have a mortgage loan participation ceded to the security agent. We've already mentioned CBZ Bank. That's Max over there, my partner. So there's a management company, which is essentially CBZ and myself, that is going to manage this process. And having the biggest bank in Zimbabwe is extremely helpful because they've got the distribution network, and effectively they will be acting as a servicing agent for Kwangu Management Company on an arm's length basis. So we negotiate performance service level agreements and bonds, but they control all the cash flow, disbursements out and collections in. And then obviously, as with any other financing structure, as loans are repaid in tranches, so the security gets ceded across to the relevant institution. I think that's all on that. So in terms of what we're talking about here, and I think that the masterclass on the first day clarified this is maybe more a PPP than blended finance per se, but it's the public guarantees and land contribution marrying the private capital that gets to the scalability of this, and that's where the impact comes. So, lenders are going to fund the infrastructure via drawdowns. Government is providing some level of support. We've been debating whether it's an outright cession of T-bills or just a guarantee. This is to infrastructure lenders we're talking to in Zimbabwe. And that helps de-risk the investment, and we hope that, again, over time, that becomes less concessional as the money is recycled and we prove the concept. The loans are serviced by the collection agent, our friends at CBZ. We're also, somebody spoke earlier today about an opportunity, a problem being an opportunity. So one of the things we will know when we go and speak to major institutions is you have to have credit cover, you have to have life cover. Now everyone said that's impossible, but it's not, because we've got pools of capital where we've basically gone and we've got a pricing from CBZ, we've gone out and got 3 different quotes. Actuaries aren't the most exciting people in the world. I hope no one here is an actuary. But when I've sat down with the actuaries from the life companies and said, we are going to give you a pool of residents, and it's zero adverse selection, every single person has to get life cover, irrespective of background, disability, or age, their eyes lit up. They actually were quite excited. This is sort of actuarial science 101, having absolute pull draws without any adverse selection. So we've looked at this, and we can give life products of, on average, it'll be about a $5,000 loan that we need to take for the infrastructure at about $2.50 a month. So people who have never been able to access life cover before are now getting life cover. And it was from the market surveying, people are saying, what if I die? You know, what happens to my house? We said, don't worry, your house is paid off, your beneficiaries are going to be looked after. So that's been quite exciting. I think we've got about this. The loans will be backed by senior participations. We're going to go for infrastructure bonds, mortgage-backed securities. We're looking at listing them on the Vic Falls Stock Exchange, and ultimately this will help create the bond market. So, yeah, that's pretty exciting. And talking about where we are right now, it's really about getting to scale. So infrastructure on the one hand and inclusion. I don't know if you can read that, but on the infrastructure side, we've targeted 4 different suburbs. So there's 2 in Harare, Epworth and Southley, Kadri Park in Bulawayo, and then Gimboki and Mutare. There's somebody here from the Mutare City Council. I don't know if she's in the room, but I met her on the trip yesterday. These are the 3 major cities in Zimbabwe. Across those 4 projects, there's $150 million of infrastructure, and it's phased. So that's just the first 2 phases of Epworth and the first phase of the other 3. And we're trying to break it up into modular bite sizes that we can handle with our local capital market between the pension funds and the institutional investors. And so we're using those as prototypes. They're pretty advanced. We've got full drawings for 3 of the projects. Tsube Borough is one of the most reputable civil engineering firms in the country, has got the master deed of planning this project. And then we've got 1 residential area, Chitangwiza, which is the big township in Harare. There are 55,000 title deeds that are ready to be issued, and they don't need infrastructure upgrading. We've been dealing with the city council, but they're very excited about the idea of financial inclusion. So again, and respect to the bank, you know, when we've been discussing this, people are saying, but how do you credit assess everybody? And this is not a credit assessment. This is, you have a title deed, low LTV, cookie cutter, $3,000 against the minimum value of the house, and you pay it off over 3 years. And I need to point out, this is not a mortgage finance in the sense of home loans. This is equity release. This is capital injection. I, wearing another hat, have a private equity business where we have a packing house on a major farm. We borrowed $2 million. We could only get 3-year financing at 18.5% in US dollars. So that's as a top-tier corporate. For people in the street, there is no credit, and the only money you can get is from loan sharks, payday lenders, microfinance at 10% a month. So if you offer people 3-year amortizing, basically asset finance at even 17 or 18% in dollars, sounds expensive. It's very cheap in the Zimbabwean market. And again, the market forces will prevail. Over time, that'll come down. So we're really excited about this. I think if you want to have a shot in the arm for the country, this is really quite significant. And then what are we looking for from government? So the government is giving incentives. They've already given land. We've got them to agree to tax exemption, prescribed asset, and liquid asset status. So for local banks, local pension funds, this makes it attractive. You know, Zimbabwean investors are gun shy. We've had hyperinflation several times. The institutional investors are really nervous, and it's going to take some marketing to sell it to them, because MBS is a nice concept, but they've given money to the government before and it's disappeared or it's changed currency. You know, the old joke is a deposit with a Zimbabwean bank becomes tier 2 capital very quickly. So, sorry, I'm pointing at you, Max, but money has disappeared. But I think what we do know is there's significant pension funds and insurance companies in Zimbabwe that are looking for alternative asset classes, and we've got to just gradually build this as we go. We're leading on the more political ones, NASA and the public sector pension fund, to lead the way. I'm talking to Old Mutual, which is a major investor, and I think that they could be catalytic. And then over time, we need to start going cross-border. Now, the one thing that international investors will want, along with all the normal security, is guarantees that they can get the money out the country in US dollars. And again, we're working on that. The currency regime to 2030 allows for that. But I think that we'll have to see what happens beyond that. But you've got to take baby steps. And again, Jamarka, theory is nice. Practice is what you've got to do. We've got to take the first steps and prove the skeptics wrong. So, what is the journey ahead? I think on the remaining hurdles, we've talked about this a lot, investor risk perception. You know, when you're dealing with a country that is printing money recklessly and the currency is at risk, you've got a fairly dictatorial president who's not overly close to democracy, targeting individuals. Now, hang on a second, that's the United States. Sorry, I'm going off piste here. But that's the reality. What I've just described, could be literally the United States at the moment. And I think that Zimbabwe, for whatever reason, has always been held to a higher standard of account than many other African countries. I've never understood that. I'm not Zimbabwean, I just love the country and I've been there a lot. You know, it's an imperfect country, but the risk perception is wrong. Strive Masiyiwa, who is the most successful businessman in Zimbabwe, has a famous saying that perception of risk is inversely proportional to practical experience. So I think that's extremely true. And so, you know, I've done business in 20 African countries in my Standard Bank in subsequent days. Zimbabwe is probably the easiest country to do business in after Rwanda. The legal system works, the people are educated. So, you know, we're going to have to sell that. I don't dispute that. The sanctions and the sovereign rating issues are impediments. But 10, 12 years ago, Deb came out with the State Department, and you guys met an OFAC-sanctioned finance minister. So people are prepared to engage if you do it properly. So what we're looking for is support from institutional investors, in the first instance domestically, later from hopefully internationals, DFIs and philanthropics. Very much the theme of this conference being blended finance. You need to bring everybody together. But it's easy to be down in the trenches and to miss what we've done. So what have we achieved to date? We have fully digitized the cadastral system in Zimbabwe. We brought in a system from Rwanda. It's taken a few years. Nothing happens quickly, but it's happened. So we've got probably the most state-of-the-art cadastral system on the continent. We have, after many painful meetings, got an online bond registration system where you can now register a mortgage bond and do the conveyancing online. We've trained all of the lawyers in the country. Unfortunately, we haven't got the concession that we wanted. You know, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, so the Law Society wasn't that thrilled about dropping their fees from 3% to 1%, but we'll continue to lobby and we'll squeeze them. The government has contributed land and incentives. I mean, I've got to take my hat off to government. It's an extraordinary thing in a country that's fiscally constrained and has got plenty of other issues. And we've done that over the electoral cycle, as we all talk about, you know, African countries, and it's true of America. Again, we keep pointing to the States. Electoral cycles matter. This started before the election. I thought the moment the election happened that we'd drop it because it was an electioneering thing. Now it's become a legacy project for His Excellency, and that's fantastic. So we've managed to see through these cycles. And then the thing that I think is most amazing is after very many meetings, the very first meeting I went to at the Lands office, we said, how are we going to change the face of the country and issue 2 million title deeds? And the Surveyor General said, oh, we're going to need lots more typewriters. And I said, okay, we definitely need to just take a step back. And after many painful iterations, and I'm not good at dealing with politicians, so I've tried to stay out of it, we now have a command center set up in the Ministry of Lands. We've got representatives of 5 different departments. We can do 1,000 title deeds and bond registrations a day. I mean, that's extraordinary for a country that did several hundred a month. And yeah, thank you. It can be done. You just have to be bloody-minded and jump out the airplane and hope your parachute's in your back. And we've got these 4 projects identified. So, you know, I hope that that gives some encouragement to you. I believe that other countries can do the same thing. We are many steps on the journey. We're not there yet, but we persevere. So, thank you very much. I'm happy to take a question.
Any questions?
Good. Oh, all right. Well, what you
Paul, do you want to shout?
There we go. Yeah.
Thanks. I really like that perception of risk is inversely proportional to practical experience. Yeah. And my perception is it's all very well taking a security and allocating it, but can you perfect it? And you say this legal system works, but what is the perfection of security risk? Because security is not worth anything if you can't perfect it.
Well, two aspects of it. So the legal system of Zimbabwe is robust and perfection has happened. Everyone thinks after the land reform process and agricultural land, that's very different from urban land. I mean, I can point to my colleague in the bank. The foreclosure process is well documented, established, and practiced. You can foreclose on houses. My partner Tait has experience of that. The bank has experience of that. It's been very rare, and I think like your experience in Tough, I suspect the default rates are going to be very, very low. Ted, my partner, set up a housing project in Zimbabwe in the 90s. There were 3,500 houses they built in 3 months, 3 years, I should say. And they had one default at the end of the process, and they settled that in the courthouse steps. I imagine that our default rate is going to be a fraction of 1%. And I'm not saying that naively. This is based on our experience on the continent. But we have every intention of foreclosing and kicking people out their houses if they default. And you've got to be absolutely crystal clear. That is the basis. The education has been clear. If you want a title deed, you will have to register a bond to be able to put the infrastructure in. You don't have to take the financial inclusion, but you will have to take the infrastructure. That's a quid pro quo for free land. And I didn't actually tell this, but tell this. We're registering the mortgage bond at about $25 per square meter for the small areas. So it goes up to about $4,000 or $5,000, and the installments are going to be under $100 a month. It's actually not very much about interest rate. It's about installments. But we will foreclose if we have to.
Richard, thank you.